Hello, channel family. What I'm about to share today changed my life forever, and I need to tell it because I know many of you have gone through something similar. My name is Thomas, and at 48 years old, I was a humble priest at St. Jude's Parish, a place I poured my heart and soul into for 2 decades. It was my home, my family, my entire world, until it was all ripped away. Today, you will see how I got my revenge in the best way possible after everything was cruelly taken from me. In today's story, you will discover how I, a man devoted to God and my community, was publicly accused of sacrilege by the very man meant to uphold our faith, Bishop Valerius. Imagine standing before your flock, serving the holiest of sacraments, only to have your life shattered in an instant. This wasn't just an accusation. It was a carefully orchestrated public execution of my character, designed to destroy me completely and utterly. It was a moment that burned into my soul, marking the true beginning of my fall from grace. It happened during a solemn Sunday Mass, the kind where the air itself feels thick with reverence and peace. The cathedral was packed, every pew filled with familiar faces I had blessed, baptized, and comforted over the years. We were at the altar, the most sacred spot, ready to share in the Eucharist. Then, a tense silence fell, heavy and unnatural, as a small, seemingly accidental spill of consecrated wine occurred right there, near the holy chalice. It was a minor incident, or so I thought, easily remedied. But that silence was only a prelude to a far greater shock. Bishop Valerius, standing beside me, suddenly straightened, his voice booming through the hallowed halls, declaring my actions a sacrilege born of arrogance. He claimed I had deliberately disrespected the holy elements, stating he had witnessed my supposed defiance. His face was a mask of feigned sorrow, but his eyes held a cold, calculated glint. He said I was trying to undermine his authority, to sow discord where there should be unity. I stood there, stunned and heartbroken, my mind reeling. The words caught in my throat, my attempts to defend myself drowned out by his booming voice and the collective gasp of the parishioners. Their faces, usually filled with warmth and trust, were now etched with shock, confusion, and even judgment. In that moment, I knew my life, as I knew it was over, stripped bare before their very eyes. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? Listen to this story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? That moment, right there at the altar, when Bishop Valerius's booming voice accused me, it was like the world just stopped. 1 second I was serving God, dedicating my life, and the next, everything I knew, everything I was, simply ceased to exist. It wasn't just a mistake he was claiming, it was a deliberate, cruel blow to my very soul. My heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a searing, burning pain of utter disbelief. How could this be happening? His eyes, usually so warm and paternal, were now cold, almost triumphant, as he twisted a small accident into a grand act of sacrilege. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the packed cathedral, shifting from reverence to suspicion, from love to outright condemnation. It was a calculated performance, designed to strip me of dignity, of purpose, and most painfully, of my flock. The consecrated wine, spilled by his own subtle move, became a symbol of my public execution. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a deafening roar of judgment, echoing off the stained glass windows. Faces I had known for decades, faces I had seen through joy and sorrow, now looked at me with a mixture of shock and betrayal. They believed him. They believed the man who stood beside me, betraying me, a shepherd devouring his own. My throat tightened, words failing me, as the truth seemed to vanish under the weight of his authority. In that instant, my entire identity as Father Thomas, the humble priest of St. Jude's, crumbled into dust. 20 years of devoted service, countless prayers, baptisms, and comforting words, all reduced to nothing by a single, malicious accusation. It wasn't just my career, it was my home, my family, my spiritual calling, my reason for being. The very ground beneath my feet felt like it was dissolving. leaving me adrift in a sea of despair and profound injustice. That was the moment, the precise second when the man I was, the life I knew, died. But in its place, something new began to stir within me, a cold, quiet resolve I hadn't known I possessed. The initial shock gave way to a burning indignation, a deep-seated certainty that this couldn't stand. I didn't know how or what it would cost, but I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this gross injustice demanded more than just quiet suffering. It demanded answers, and it demanded a reckoning. Before that terrible day, before Bishop Valerius shattered my world, my life was a quiet testament to faith and service. I was born in a small town, nothing fancy, just a simple upbringing with good, honest parents who taught me the value of hard work and kindness. From a young age, I felt a pull towards something greater, a whisper in my heart that spoke of God's purpose for me. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, just a steady, growing conviction that my path lay in serving Him and His people. My childhood was filled with Sunday school lessons, church picnics, and the comforting rhythm of daily prayers. There were no grand ambitions for wealth or power. My dreams were humble, focused on making a difference in the lives around me, even in the smallest ways. I saw the beauty in simple acts of charity, in offering a listening ear, or in sharing a word of comfort. This foundation shaped who I became, a man who believed in the inherent goodness of humanity. Entering the seminary was a natural step, a journey of rigorous study and spiritual formation. It wasn't easy, mind you. There were long nights poring over theological texts, moments of doubt, and the constant challenge of self-reflection. But through it all, my resolve only strengthened. I learned the deep traditions of our faith, the sacred rituals, and the profound responsibility that came. The moment Bishop Valerius finished his cruel pronouncement, my life as I knew it evaporated into thin air. I was stripped of my vestments right there in the sacristy, the symbolic removal of my sacred calling feeling like a physical tearing of my soul. The familiar fabric, once a comfort, was yanked away, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. It wasn't just my clothes. It was my identity, my purpose, everything I had dedicated 2 decades to building. The silence from the church staff was deafening, a clear sign of their fear, or perhaps their complicity in the bishop's narrative. Excommunication followed swiftly, a cold, official letter arriving the next morning, sealing my fate. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a spiritual banishment, cutting me off from the very community I had sworn to serve. My home, the rectory attached to St. Jude's, was no longer mine. I had a week to pack my meager belongings, each item a painful reminder of a life now irrevocably lost. The keys, once a symbol of trust, felt like lead in my trembling hand as I surrendered them to a stony-faced diocesan official. The hardest part was seeing the faces of my parishioners, not just during the Mass, but in the days that followed. Most avoided my gaze, their eyes darting away as if I carried a contagious disease. Whispers followed me down the street, accusations of arrogance and sacrilege painting me as something monstrous. The children I had baptized, the couples I had married, the grieving families I had comforted, they were all now told to shun me, to believe the worst. It felt like a betrayal from every direction. My reputation, built on years of honest service and genuine care, was utterly destroyed. My name, Father Thomas, once spoken with respect and affection, was now synonymous with disgrace. The local newspaper, usually filled with parish news, carried a small, damning article about the unfortunate incident at the cathedral, subtly reinforcing the bishop's version of events. There was no mention of my side, no chance for me to explain, just a cold public condemnation that cemented my fall. Financially, I was destitute. Priests don't amass fortunes. Our lives are modest, our needs provided by the church. Overnight, I had no income, no savings to speak of, and nowhere to go. My meager personal funds barely covered a few nights at a cheap motel on the outskirts of Sanctum, far from the familiar streets of my former parish. The weight of this sudden poverty pressed down on me, a stark contrast to the comfortable, if simple, life I had always known. I had to leave Sanctum, the town that had been my home for 20 years. The glances, the whispers, the outright hostility from some who had once called me friend, it was too much to bear. I packed what I could into an old suitcase and boarded a bus, feeling like a criminal fleeing justice, even though I was the one who had been wronged. Each mile that separated me from St. Jude's was another stab to my heart, a further severing of ties. The church bulletins, once a source of pride, now carried my slander in every edition. Formal notices of my excommunication, warnings against associating with me, and glowing reports of Bishop Valerius's leadership filled the pages. It was a constant, public reminder of my disgrace, spread throughout the diocese, ensuring that wherever I might try to find solace or a fresh start, my past would follow, a dark shadow preceding me. Ostracization became my daily reality. I tried to find work, anything to survive, but my past as an excommunicated priest made me a pariah. Doors closed in my face almost immediately. People saw the judgment in the headlines, and it was enough to brand me. Even secular employers, usually indifferent to religious affiliations, seemed hesitant, wary of the controversy surrounding my name. It was a loneliness I had never experienced. My despair grew deeper with each passing day. I found myself wandering aimlessly, sleeping in parks when I couldn't afford a room. The constant gnawing of hunger, a new, unwelcome companion. The spiritual comfort I once offered to others was now desperately sought by myself, but it felt elusive. Prayer felt like a hollow echo in a vast, empty space. My faith tested in ways I never imagined possible. I saw Bishop Valerius's face on television, on local news segments, discussing his vision for the diocese. He looked triumphant, his voice smooth and confident, speaking of unity and growth, painting himself as the savior of the church. It was a bitter pill to swallow, watching him bask in praise and consolidate his power, knowing it was all built on a foundation of lies and my shattered life. His prosperity was my personal hell. One particularly low moment, I was rummaging through a dumpster behind a bakery, desperate for something to eat. A former parishioner, a woman I had counseled through her husband's illness, recognized me. Her eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with disgust. She quickly pulled her child away, muttering something about the disgraced priest. The humiliation burned, a raw, searing pain that felt worse than any physical wound. I became acutely aware of how quickly people turn. The fair-weather friends, the ones who praised my sermons but never truly knew my heart, vanished. They were quick to embrace the bishop's narrative, finding it easier to condemn than to question. It was a harsh lesson in human nature, revealing the fragility of loyalty when confronted with authority and fear. My world felt suddenly very small and very cold. Even the few who offered a kind word did so cautiously, in hushed tones, as if afraid of contagion. A street vendor once slipped me an extra bread roll, his eyes full of pity, but he quickly looked away when others approached. It was a small act of kindness, yet it highlighted my fallen status, a stark reminder that I was no longer seen as a respected figure, but as an object of charity and suspicion. I thought about my family, my parents. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the full extent of my disgrace. How could I explain that their son, the priest they were so proud of, was now homeless and accused of sacrilege? The thought of their heartbreak was unbearable, adding another layer of silent suffering to my burden. I cut off contact, convinced it was for their own good to spare them the shame. The cold pavement became my bed more often than not. The nights were long and filled with a crushing sense of failure. I, who had preached hope and redemption, now felt utterly hopeless. The stars above, once a source of spiritual wonder, seemed indifferent to my plight, mirroring the vast emptiness that had taken root in my soul. Every breath felt like a struggle against an overwhelming tide of despair. I saw a young priest fresh out of seminary, taking my place at St. Jude's. He looked earnest and full of hope, just as I once was. Bishop Valerius stood beside him, beaming, presenting him to the congregation as a new beginning. It was a deliberate, calculated insult, a public display of my replacement, a clear message that I was not only forgotten, but actively erased from the church's memory. The injustice of it all gnawed at me, a constant dull ache beneath the surface of my despair. It wasn't just my life. It was the truth that had been twisted, the faith that had been manipulated. The bishop's actions weren't just against me. They were against the very principles I believed in, a corruption of the sacred office he held. This thought, quiet at first, began to burn with a steady intensity. I started to read the Bible again, not for sermons, but for solace. Verses about suffering, about perseverance, about truth prevailing against lies began to stand out. The truth will set you free, echoed in my mind. It was a lifeline in the darkness, a faint glimmer that perhaps, just perhaps, God had a different plan for this profound injustice. My Christian faith, though bruised, was not broken. This wasn't just about my personal suffering anymore. It was about Valerius's deceit, his ability to harm others, to corrupt the church from within. The thought of him continuing his charade, preying on the faithful, became intolerable. My initial shock and heartbreak slowly gave way to a simmering anger, a righteous indignation that demanded more than just quiet acceptance. I remembered the faces of the parishioners, especially the children, their innocent eyes filled with confusion that day. They deserved to know the truth. They deserved a shepherd who genuinely cared for their spiritual well-being, not one who would sacrifice an innocent man for his own ambition. This realization solidified my growing resolve. It wasn't just about me. It was about them. The despair was still there, a heavy cloak, but now, underneath it, a tiny spark had ignited. It was a cold, quiet resolve, a steel-like determination I hadn't known I possessed. The idea of just fading away, of letting Valerius win, became an unacceptable outcome. My spirit, though wounded, refused to be extinguished by his malicious act. I started to observe things differently. The way people spoke, the subtle shifts in power dynamics, the patterns of behavior. My mind, once focused on spiritual duties, began to analyze the mundane details of the world around me, searching for clues, for weaknesses. It was an instinct, a survival mechanism kicking in, sharpening my senses in a way I hadn't experienced before. The thought of revenge, not a petty, vengeful act, but a just reckoning, started to form. It wasn't about personal retribution in a hateful way. It was about exposing the truth, about righting a profound wrong. It felt like a mission, given to me not by man, but by a higher power, a calling to uncover the darkness that had consumed my life. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I was an excommunicated priest, without resources or influence. But the fire of injustice, fueled by my faith and the desire for truth, burned brighter than any fear. I had lost everything, which meant I had nothing left to lose. This newfound freedom from fear became my quiet strength, a powerful engine for what was to come. So there I was, at the very bottom, stripped of everything but not broken. The pain was immense, the humiliation constant, yet within that abyss a seed of purpose took root. I would not just suffer, I would fight. I would find a way to make the truth known, not just for myself, but for the integrity of the faith I still cherished. My journey for justice was only just beginning. #ACT6. After all that humiliation, after losing everything, I was truly at rock bottom. The days blurred into weeks, filled with the gnawing emptiness of hunger and the crushing weight of despair. I felt utterly abandoned, a discarded shell of the man I once was. My prayers often felt hollow, echoing in an empty space, wondering if God had truly forsaken me. It was a dark, desolate period where hope seemed like a forgotten dream, a luxury I could no longer afford. Every breath was a struggle. But even in that deep darkness, a faint light began to flicker. I remembered a verse from the Bible I used to preach. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. Matthew chapter 18, verse 20. It wasn't about a crowd anymore. It was about me, alone, and God. I realized I wasn't truly alone. He was there, listening, even when I couldn't hear him. This thought, simple as it was, became a tiny anchor in my stormy sea. It got me thinking about that awful day, the Mass. Not just the pain, but the details. Who was there? What exactly happened? My mind, usually focused on grand spiritual concepts, started picking apart the mundane. The way the light hit the stained glass, the rustle of vestments, the faint smell of incense. And then a memory, a fleeting image, popped into my head, sharp and clear. It was like a whisper in my soul, a divine spark. I pictured Lily, little Lily, the quiet altar server, with bright, curious eyes. She was always so diligent, so focused, but also so small. Usually she'd be positioned near the back, by the sacristy entrance, just out of the main view, ready to assist. On that specific Sunday, I remembered her being a little late, hurrying to her spot just before the consecration began. It was a small detail, but it suddenly felt huge. My mind raced. If she was near the back, behind that large stone pillar, she would have had a unique vantage point. She was small enough to be easily overlooked, especially by someone focused on orchestrating a spectacle. Bishop Valerius, in his grand performance, wouldn't have given a second thought to a child hidden from the main congregation. He would have assumed no one truly saw his subtle movements. The thought hit me like a revelation, a gift from above. What if Lily had seen something before the wine spilled? What if she had witnessed the bishop's actions, unseen by the rest of the packed cathedral? It was a long shot, a desperate hope, but it was the first real clue, the first concrete lead I'd had since my world collapsed. It wasn't just a thought, it felt like a direct answer to my desperate prayers. A new kind of fear mixed with this hope. How could I approach her? She was a child, innocent and vulnerable. I couldn't just barge into her life, a disgraced priest, and demand answers. I had to be careful, gentle, and above all, protect her. This wasn't about exposing her. It was about protecting the truth and, by extension, her innocence from the bishop's malice. My Christian duty was clear. I started discreetly. I knew Lily's family lived a few towns over, a modest home near the old mill. I used my lingering connections, subtle inquiries through old acquaintances who didn't know the full extent of my excommunication, to find out where they were. It felt strange, almost like being a detective, a role so far removed from my priestly duties, yet driven by a similar quest for truth. When I finally found their humble home, my heart pounded. I introduced myself as Thomas, simply Thomas, a former friend of the parish, and spoke vaguely about the unfortunate events at the cathedral. I didn't want to alarm them or prejudice Lily. I gently asked if Lily had mentioned anything unusual that day, anything at all, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. Lily, initially shy, eventually began to talk, her small voice soft but steady. She described how Bishop Valerius had leaned over the altar, almost imperceptibly, just moments before the wine spilled. "He moved the chalice a little, Father Thomas," she whispered, "just a tiny bit, with his sleeve, when he thought no one was looking." Her innocent eyes held no malice, just the simple recounting of what she had seen. In that moment, the world shifted. It wasn't just an accusation anymore, it was a carefully planned setup, orchestrated by the very man who had condemned me. Lily's simple words, spoken with the purity of a child, were the missing piece, the undeniable proof. Bishop Valerius had been so confident, so arrogant in his deception, never imagining that a child's innocent eyes would be his undoing. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about exposing a deeper corruption. My theological knowledge, my understanding of church law, suddenly became powerful tools. I knew the weight of such testimony, especially from an altar server. It was a lifeline, pulling me from the abyss, replacing despair with a fierce, burning resolve for justice. The path forward was revealed. My faith, which had been battered and bruised, surged anew. This wasn't just luck, it was divine intervention. God had provided a witness, a small, overlooked angel, to shine a light on the bishop's darkness. My mission wasn't just personal vengeance. It was a righteous quest to protect the integrity of the church and the faithful from a wolf in shepherd's clothing. Bishop Valerius had underestimated me completely. He saw a humble priest, easily broken, easily discarded. He never imagined that the very foundation of my faith, the simple truths I held dear, would become my greatest weapon. He never considered that a child, an 8-year-old girl, could hold the key to his downfall. His arrogance had made him blind to the small details, to God's subtle hand. From that day on, my purpose was clear. The despair that had consumed me was replaced by a quiet, steely determination. I had a witness, a truth to reveal, and God on my side. The game had changed. Bishop Valerius might have thought he had won, but he had merely set the stage for his own reckoning. My journey for justice, guided by faith, was now inevitable. #ACT7. Before revealing how this long-awaited justice unfolded, it is very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. Doing so helps YouTube recommend this incredible story to more people, allowing us to spread the gospel through real-life testimonies. So please, join us in this noble cause. The Diocesan Synod was a grand spectacle. Bishop Valerius radiating false piety from the podium, ready to solidify his power. He held court among the assembled clergy, completely oblivious to the reckoning that was about to unfold. I walked in, no longer the disgraced priest they remembered, but a man renewed, accompanied by my loyal canon lawyer friend, a former aide of Valerius, and brave little Lily. A hush fell over the room as my unexpected presence registered, followed by a wave of shocked whispers. My heart, once heavy with despair, now beat with a quiet, resolute purpose. It was time to reveal the truth God had guided me to uncover. I didn't waste a moment. My lawyer stepped forward, presenting meticulously gathered evidence of Bishop Valerius's financial impropriety directly to the higher church authorities present. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, growing louder as the details of his embezzlement, hidden beneath years of pious facade, were laid bare. Valerius, initially trying to dismiss it as administrative error, stammered, his face visibly paling. His usual composure cracked, revealing a flicker of panic behind his feigned indignation. This was the first stone cast, shaking the very foundation of his carefully constructed authority. Then came the undeniable proof. My ally, Valerius's former aide, produced a small device, playing a hushed recording for all to hear. It was Valerius's own voice, confessing to the entire setup, how he subtly nudged the chalice, how he planned my public shaming, all to remove me from his path. The sound filled the stunned silence, a chilling testament to his calculated malice. The bishop's face drained of color, his jaw slacked, his arrogance replaced by raw, unadulterated fear. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape that simply wasn't there. With the recording still echoing, little Lily, brave beyond her 8 years, stepped forward. Her small voice, clear and unwavering, cut through the remaining tension. She calmly recounted what she had seen that dreadful Sunday. Bishop Valerius himself subtly tampering with the altar, just moments before the wine spilled. Her innocent eyes held no malice, only the simple, undeniable truth. A child's pure testimony, corroborating the bishop's own confession, was an unassailable blow to his deception. There was no room left for doubt, no lie he could conjure to counter her pure words. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and outraged whispers. Bishop Valerius's carefully constructed authority crumbled before our very eyes. His reputation, once pristine, lay shattered on the floor of the synod. Higher church officials quickly moved in, their faces grim, announcing his immediate suspension and the initiation of an ecclesiastical trial. Legal repercussions were also mentioned, a secular justice now looming over him. He stood there, a broken man, stripped of his power, his deceit fully exposed for the world to see. He looked utterly defeated, a puppet whose strings had been cut. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet victory washing over me. It wasn't about gloating or personal revenge in a hateful way. It was about justice. My name, once slandered, was unequivocally cleared. The integrity of the faith I cherished, which he had corrupted, was beginning to be restored. I looked around, not with anger, but with a deep understanding of God's plan. My dignity, brutally stripped away, was now quietly, serenely returned. It was a silent triumph, a testament to enduring faith and perseverance through the darkest trials. Bishop Valerius was led away, a pathetic figure, his once imposing presence reduced to nothing. I turned to Lily, offering a gentle, grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement of her courage and the truth she spoke. Then I faced the silent assembly, my voice clear and resonant, echoing through the now hallowed hall. The truth will set you free. John chapter 8, verse 32. My journey for justice wasn't just for me. It was for the church, for the faithful. My path was now clear, to continue seeking and revealing truth, wherever darkness might hide within his house.